Miss Isabel Leyva from the New York Civil Liberties Union. She has a presentation regarding the SRG unit, which is the Strategic Response Group. I suggest we hold all our questions and comments till the very end. Ms. Leyva, the floor is yours. You're muted, Ms. Leyva.
Sorry about that. Can folks see, let me share it again. Can folks see the slides? Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Alfredo, for coordinating this. I really appreciate you all taking the time. My name is Isabel. I work for the New York Civil Liberties Union. We are the New York State affiliate of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. So we are an organization that focuses on protecting and defending the civil rights and liberties of all New Yorkers. And I'm here to talk to you all about the SRG, the Strategic Response Group, and how that unit relates to your community board. So for folks that might not be familiar, I've done these presentations for a lot of community boards, and a lot of people, even generally in the city, don't know what the SRG is. The SRG, or the Strategic Response Group, it's a militarized unit of the NYPD. It was founded in 2015 as a counter-terror unit originally. And what happened was the NYPD said that this unit would be a counterterrorism unit that would also police protests. And a lot of advocacy organizations and civil rights organizations immediately said, you cannot have a unit that does both of those things, right? You cannot conflate First Amendment protests with terrorism. That's very dangerous. So the NYPD actually said, okay, never mind. This unit will only focus on counterterrorism. Unfortunately, only a month and a half later, the SRG was deployed to protest after the police killing of Freddie Gray. There were protests happening here in the city, and the SRG was deployed. And really, ever since then, the SRG has become a staple of protest policing here in New York City. And they have been nicknamed the Goon Squad by a lot of local reporters, and they are known for their abuse of protesters and community members outside of protest. The SRG was started with an original budget of $13 million. That number grew to $90 million within 1 year. And the current cost of the SRG, the estimated cost, is $133 million per year. One of the biggest issues, which I'll talk about more in a bit, with the SRG is that there is no transparency from the NYPD around the cost, the size, the mission, and the function of this unit. So the SRG is not like your local precinct cops. I know a lot of community boards have strong relationships with local precincts. This is not that. This is a specialized and militarized arm of the NYPD that really operates in this city as a rogue entity. So just for some background on how this came on our radar and came to be, we run something called the Protest Monitoring Program. Through that program, we train New Yorkers to document police conduct at protest. And the goal of that is not to look for things that the police are doing wrong, but to, we believe that one of the best ways that we can protect democracy is by keeping our eyes on police and making sure that people's rights are being respected and protected. So we are neutral observers that document police conduct at protests. And through this program, which launched in June of 2020, we have documented at more than 200 protests. And we have a timeline, which I can drop the link for in the chat, where we've kind of collected a lot of the documentation that we found. And it was really through this program that we saw that this specific unit, the SRG, was really at the center of any violence that we saw against nonviolent protesters. The evidence was really overwhelming, and that really led us to start digging into what this unit is and to launch the campaign that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So there are a lot of things that make the SRG really specifically stand out as a dangerous unit. One of the things is that the SRG is a voluntary unit, so officers sign up to join. And reports from the inside, the New York Post did some interviews when the unit was first founded, and reports from inside the department said that these are often officers that are looking for more action. And unfortunately, it's a lot of officers that already have lengthy misconduct records. And what we see is that the SRG, by comparison to other units in the NYPD at large, has much higher rates of misconduct complaints. So the median complaint rate from 2015 to 2020 for all NYPD was 3. The median complaint for the SRG is 6, so it's double. Another big issue is bias training, so racial bias that is built into the SRG's training. What we've seen as monitors is that the SRG will often crack down on racial justice protests, protests that are generally on the left politically, but they will allow white supremacist groups, groups like anti-vax groups, like right-wing groups, protest without any kind of issue. And that really goes back to their training. So in the SRG's manual, their training, which is available to the public, I encourage you to look it up. The examples that they use for violent protest groups are Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and anti-Trump demonstrators. So through their training, this unit is really trained to target racial justice protesters, and that bias translates in and out of protests. So of complaints made against SRG officers between 2015 and 2020, 91% of people who made complaints were people of color. And I believe the number is 64% of those were Black. So there is a real racial bias issue with the SRG that is really intrinsic to how the unit is trained and equipped to police. And then I already mentioned the bloated budget. There is no accountability for how this unit operates. We will talk about this in a minute, but there have been multiple opportunities for the NYPD to provide clarity around the cost, the function of this unit, and the NYPD to this day has refused to answer any questions about the SRG. So unfortunately, they are not cooperating to give us any transparency. And really, since this unit was created, we have known very little information about how much this is really costing taxpayers. And that $133 million number does not include overtime, and it does not include the dozens of lawsuits that taxpayers have to pay related to SRG conduct in and out of protests. So one of the things that came out of this is that there is a campaign to disband the SRG. So we'll talk about kind of the ways that community boards can get involved and what has happened. But just so folks know, in January of 2022, the NYCLU, us, joined more than 60 organizations. We lead a campaign to disband the SRG and to reinvest its funds back into our communities. So one of the biggest things about the SRG is that there is no unique function of this unit besides policing protest. So I'm sure a lot of people know the NYPD has a robust and well-funded counterterrorism bureau that handles counterterrorism. As of today, the SRG does not live in that bureau, and counterterrorism doesn't even show up in the SRG's mission. So what started with the counterterror unit has really become a protest policing unit, and an unnecessary one, because we have had protest police for years and years that are normal cops, right? They are beat cops, they are local precincts, there's a command structure. The SRG's only unique function is to police protest, and they are trained in militarized style crowd enforcement tactics to do that. On March 1st of 2023, after more than a year of us really pushing, City Council held an oversight hearing on the SRG. So for anyone that doesn't know, an oversight hearing is essentially when City Council will call the NYPD or any other agency to come and testify. These hearings are open to the public, so the public can come and testify about their experiences, and then the agency is supposed to show up and answer questions. It happens all the time. Like, we have an oversight of jails, then the representatives from local jails will come and answer questions. This hearing was postponed twice so that the NYPD, could attend. They did not show up. So instead, we had 5 hours of more than 100 New Yorkers testifying about the physical injuries that they've sustained from the SRG and their experience with the unit. And then again, on March 20th, during a budget hearing, more than 100 New Yorkers testified, and the NYPD again refused to answer questions about the SRG. And then only a few days ago, there was another executive budget hearing. Council members again asked the NYPD questions about this unit, and they again refused to answer any questions about the SRG. So again, it's something that New Yorkers are paying for, right? And there is a long history of this unit causing harm, and there is no accountability for what this unit does, and they don't even have to answer questions about how much it costs or what they do. So this campaign has been launched. We've been fighting for the last year. to disband the SRG. And the goal is that there should be no militarized unit that is responding to protests in New York City. We were fine before it. We will be fine after. Our position and the position of the more than 1,000 people that are part of our campaign is that the SRG does not keep us safe. And if we want to actually keep us safe and our community safe, we need to invest in things that work. And we know that the SRG is not a necessary part of that puzzle. So the goal is to remove those funds from the hands of the NYPD and reinvest them into communities, into resources that keep our communities safe and cared for. So why am I talking to you all about this? In November, the administration announced that the SRG would be deployed to 20 quote unquote high crime precincts. These are predominantly in Black and brown neighborhoods that are considered to be high crime. So they're mostly concentrated in the Bronx and then Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. There has been zero transparency around what this deployment means, what it looks like. Council members have reached out, community boards have reached out. Information has not been given as to what the SRG is doing, but beyond supporting with local police work. So supporting cops that are on the beat in neighborhoods. One of the biggest concerns here is that the SRG is really trained, like I said, in militarized tactics. I like to use the example that this is like sending the Navy into a neighborhood, right? They are trained to really treat protesters like enemy combatants in war. And they often use really escalatory tactics. They often inflict violence on people. If people are familiar with Saheed Vassell, who was killed by the NYPD in Crown Heights, Saheed struggled with mental illness. He was very well known to the precinct cops, the local cops that worked in the area. He was not well known to the SRG. The SRG was in that neighborhood, and the SRG was part of the group of, I believe, 3 or 4 officers that ended up killing Mr. Vassell when they mistook his pipe for a gun. So to us, the real concern is that New Yorkers are at risk when a militarized unit that is not familiar with the community is being sent into neighborhoods. And when a unit is so known for racial bias, to send that unit into communities of color is deeply alarming to us. So we have been talking to community boards that are in all of these districts, and we have been just letting folks know that this is happening. The little graphic here that you see that says the SRG is being deployed into your community, these are little palm cards that show like what the SRG is, some information about them, information about what the campaign is. So we've been doing distribution of those in neighborhoods, just letting people know, because like I said, a lot of people don't even know that the SRG exists, let alone that it's in their community. So that's why I wanted to talk to you all, and we've been doing a lot of these meetings. Community Board 8, Manhattan Community Board 8 actually just passed a resolution in support of disbanding the SRG, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute. This is just really quickly so folks know, we have 24 council members that are currently signed on to the campaign to disband the SRG. So these are council members that are champions for the campaign, that are fighting to disband the SRG in the budget, that are fighting to reinvest that estimated $133 million of funding back into neighborhoods. So these are the folks that are currently signed on, and we're continuing to gather sign-ons as we do outreach. So the things that community boards can do, obviously as an individual, there are things that you can do if you're interested in getting involved. You can sign up for the campaign. You can urge your council member to sign on to the campaign if they haven't already. There is a hearing this Wednesday, the last hearing where New Yorkers can testify about what we want to see in the budget. We are mobilizing folks to testify at that hearing to push for the SRG to be disbanded. That's another way to get involved. And then in terms of what the community board can do as a whole, obviously community boards land in different areas, right? So some people really feel strongly like they want to support the effort to disband the SRG. Some people are not quite there, but do not want the SRG in their neighborhood. So the ask that we have made, and this is just an introductory meeting, so that you all know what the ask is, but the 2 options that we provided are issuing a resolution in support of disbandment of the SRG, and then also just issuing a statement saying that you do not want the SRG in your community or in any community. And obviously, it's completely up to you. There could be something in the middle that you land on, but those are the two most common things that we've gone with. And like I said, Manhattan CB8 just passed a resolution in support of disbandment, which I think was on Friday. It was officially passed and released. So that's it. I'm happy to answer questions and further discuss any pieces of this. I know it's a lot of information. And I can also share resources, data points, all the things that I mentioned are backed up by our sources that I can share with you as well.
Thank you so much, Ms. Leva. I appreciate you coming out, giving this presentation. Is this presentation shareable that you can send to us?
Yeah, I can send it to you. Absolutely.
Perfect, beautiful. I'll have the mic open. I'll go first with our committee members, then community board members, then elected officials and or their representatives, and then the community if they want to speak about this. I'll wait to the end to give my opinions because I don't want my opinions to interfere or take over other people's opinions. So I'll let everyone else speak and I'll speak last. Anyone has any comments, concerns? You gotta raise your hands, guys. Mr. Q, you up.
Hey, thank you so much for the presentation. We really appreciate it. Wow, and that's why it's great to come to these type of meetings because just being, a Black man who grew up in the neighborhood, I can say that growing up, like I used to always get stopped, and it was extremely unfair. And I think that the community board has done a great job in building the relationship with the, current precinct that we have, the 47th precinct. I don't see that as much anymore. So to see something like this happening in our city where, it's first they were just focusing on protests, a lot of protests have died down. Now
Mr.
they're going to
Q,
become, yes.
Mr. Q, give me 1 second. Can everybody hear Mr. Q by show of hands? Yes, okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Continue.
No worries. So it's extremely unfair that we're gonna have these type of divisions, military divisions coming into our neighborhoods and policing, our children. And there's so many studies that show minorities, Black and brown people, for whatever reason, they just get looked at and, they feel someone feels they're doing something wrong. So my main concern is, I'm not on the community board. I would urge the community board to join this resolution, but also I feel it's important that we get the transparency on what this actually costs and where the money can go. A lot of times, New York City, they're gonna take the funds and they're not gonna share any information. That's why they're not sharing any information, and then they're gonna go ahead and create some type of other secret organization that no one knows of. So the fact that all of these things are going into policing our people and essentially bringing us down, I'm not in support of. There's a lot of science, technology, education, math, STEM, computers, things that we can use in the community. A lot of children coming out of high school don't know what a credit score is. They don't know about basic finances and just certain things that could help them. Even, sex education. A lot of children, there's so many things that we could have within our high school systems and programs in the community that would be able to help our youth. So I'm not for these people. I pray to God they don't come into our communities because they will look at our children. And the last thing I'm going to say, I have a story. I used to be an investment banker on Wall Street, and I remember every Tuesday within Community Board 12, well, within the district on White Plains Road, they'll set up these roadblocks, and they would randomly stop, Black men. They would set up these checkpoints, randomly stop Black men. And I remember I was coming from work, and he saw me in my suit. He's like, "Oh, just keep going." I said, "What's going on?" He's like, "Oh, no, we're just stopping people." But he looked at my appearance and he let me go. And 3 hours later, I changed. I have a Yankee hat on, I have some sweats on, and then the same cop stopped me again. And I'm like, "Bro, you just stopped me 3 hours ago." He's like, "No, license or registration." I'm like, "Remember?" And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry." He apologized, and then he let me go. So I don't want it to be a situation where people who aren't familiar with the people in the community begin to come in and, you know, treat us away and start causing problems. Obviously, arrests are going to go up. A lot of things are going to change. And it's not essentially making it safer for us. So we definitely want that transparency. We want to see how much money they're getting, how much funding they're getting, and then we need some form of commitment from New York City to make sure that those funds are being used properly. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Q. Ms. Leva, you looking for a letter of support, or you just what exactly you're looking for from this
Yeah.
particular community board?
Yeah, so we're asking for resolutions of support. So either for disbanding the unit, if that's where you're aligned, or for or calling for the unit not to be deployed to communities. And I don't think I explicitly mentioned it. I know it was on the slide, but the unit has been deployed to the 47th precinct. So that is one of the precincts where the SRG is currently being deployed.
Any other members, community members, elected officials, representatives? The only person that has the hand raised is Mr. Q. There's a couple of us here. I don't see nobody, no hands raised. Anita? And then Benga.
Hi, good evening. My name is Anita Antonetti. I am from the Department of Youth and Community Development. Our commissioner, Keith Howard, has decided that our agency is going to enhance its programs and probably create newer programs in order to combat. Right now, they're focusing on the gun violence, and they have found that the 47th precinct and there's 5 others, the 41st, the 42nd, the 44th in the Bronx, and then in Brooklyn, the 73rd and 75th. So I was very interested to see that list that Ms. Lenya was showing, where this army has been deployed. But the Department of Youth and Community Development are holding events throughout the community and throughout the 47th precinct to bring awareness of other programs of DYCD that are mostly a lot for youth, but it's also for community development, which takes care of everybody else besides youth, and to bring notice to those programs and that children and families can come and use those programs. And we're trying to see how we can enhance our programs so that they cover everybody. It's a more positive way of dealing with crime in the neighborhoods. But this is so alarming to me because I live in the 44th precinct. So you know, it's really terrible. But we're going to be sending a lot of information to the community board and through our neighborhood advisory boards, which Mr. Alfredo is part of, and we'll be in the neighborhoods and in this neighborhood. So thank you for letting me give my opinion. I was here just to observe, but I couldn't stay quiet. There's other ways of dealing with issues in our community, and this army is not a way to do it.
Thank you so much, Anita. I really appreciate
welcome.
your comments and concerns. Benga.
Yes, thank you very much, my brother Alfredo. Nice presentation, Ms. Isabel. The Oversight Committee on the New York City Council, what are they doing in terms of maybe funding, holding them accountable, and still trying to get an explanation from them since 2015 about this unit based on their ways and practices? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the oversight hearing that they held was supposed to be the opportunity to hold them accountable. So council members were prepared to ask the questions, to get the answers. Unfortunately, the way that the system works, there actually isn't anything that they can do if the NYPD refuses to show up. What's happening now is that the NYPD is saying that their legal counsel is recommending that they don't speak about the SRG because there are so many lawsuits against the SRG's officers. So they're saying that there is a gag order. The gag order does not exist. The media has kind of debunked that, but they're refusing to talk. So short of subpoenaing the NYPD to talk about this, forcing them to answer, the city council has their hands tied because the NYPD just continues to refuse to show up. So that's kind of where we're at. And our point with the campaign is that we should not be funding a unit that is refusing to submit to accountability. We should not be giving money to a unit that is refusing to answer questions about where that money's going. So even though we're not getting the answers we want from the NYPD, to us, that actually helps our case, right? Because they're refusing to submit to the council's authority the way that every other agency has to.
Thank you, Venga.
Thank you.
Ms. Talene Dickerson. Talene, we can hear you.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, I know I'm doing grandma duties, so I had to move away from all the cartoons.
Go, Grandma. Go, Grandma.
Good evening, family. How y'all doing? I just wanted to make sure that I see a couple of people from ByCB, which I mean I worked with for over 43 years through PAL, and another person with the RISE project. Not familiar with the RISE project, but I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that I put my information in the chat. I am the Education and Youth Services Committee Chair, so I'm hoping that you will take my information and please contact me at your leisure. And Miss Antonetti, you never, ever, ever have to stay quiet, okay? All right, okay, so you have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Talene. Ms. Carla Barsetti.
Hi. So my question is, where is the CCRB in all this? Because we can all query any city agency or department data. If I query CCRB data, will these complaints be in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CCRB includes all complaints that are not currently under litigation. So if there's a lawsuit around them, they will not show up. But the data that we have around like race breakdowns, all of that is through the CCRB. And the NYCLU actually has our own database where we scrape everything from the CCRB and make it legible. So I'm happy to drop that link in the chat as well. And just in terms of the CCRB's role, the CCRB was actually, they showed up to the hearing that the NYPD did not show up to, and they answered questions from the council. And unfortunately, the CCRB only has the power to make recommendations. So they review, if they get a complaint, they review it. They make a recommendation to the NYPD about what the disciplinary action should be. So if a cop should be fired, if the cop should have vacation days removed, whatever the disciplinary action is. The NYPD does not have to follow those disciplinary actions. So basically what the CCRB talked about in their testimony is that very often their recommendations are not being followed. So officers are actually going without discipline, despite the fact that they have been found to have substantiated complaints by the CCRB.
Okay, thank you.
Venga, you got something else to say? Your hand is raised.
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. I'll put it down. Sorry about that.
Hey, Alfredo. Sorry. I had a quick question for Isabel.
Yep.
There was recently, I was reading, I think like in March or April, it was like some, I guess a record settlement, like during protest or something. It was like 6 million or something. Well, is that the same organization?
Correct.
And it's weird because I saw a lot of people celebrating. I'm like, you do know we're the ones actually paying for this,
Yeah.
right? It's like the money is coming from us. It's not coming from their budget. It's not coming from their pensions, their salaries. So we're actually paying for the mess that they create. And then they're continuing to abuse individuals who are predominantly minorities within the city, which is kind of crazy, to be honest.
Yeah, that was the Mott Haven protest in the Bronx. That was when they set a curfew for protests, and then right before the curfew, it was the SRG. They trapped protesters. They arrested almost 300 people, including legal observers, medics. They sent 60 people to the hospital. And Human Rights Watch, which is a global organization, did a report on that and said that it was a violation of international human rights law. That was the SRG that conducted that, and that's what that settlement came from.
And last thing, what has the mayor said about this? Because I'm pretty sure this has been brought to his attention. I know he's an NYPD guy, but what has he said?
Yeah, the mayor's aware of the campaign. He has barely spoken on it, but he was asked a few months ago, and he said that the SRG did a great job. So that's the as far as the comment as we've gotten from him is that they do a great job.
Thank you, Isabel. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Q. Anyone else? No one else? Now's the time to speak up. So the Civil Liberties Union is looking for a letter of support from the community board. I'll speak my mind, and again, my mind, my opinions, my concerns should not deter anyone's vote regarding the letter of support. Again, listen, we live in a world right now that a lot of stuff is not kosher. The violence that's going on in New York City, it's above and beyond crazy. Me myself, I mean, I've never had a run-in with this particular unit. I've seen of them, I know of them. I don't know if dismantling them, removing them, getting rid of them is going to help the crime situation in New York City. I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, my opinions are my opinion. I mean, I don't think, us giving a letter of support to dismantle a unit, within the NYPD that we actually need. I mean, the crime is out of control. Maybe we got to send these SRG units to every corner. I mean, instead of just getting rid of them, where are they going to stick all these cops at? I mean, just getting rid of the unit is not going to get rid of the cops. They're going to stick them somewhere else. You see what I'm saying? There's bad cops. Of course there are. It's like there's bad people in every city agency in New York City, and throughout, even in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You know what I'm saying? The question is, what exactly are we trying to do, right? Like, the crime is not going to go nowhere. Protesting is not going to go nowhere. People protest because they're upset. I mean, they're upset, and people have the right to protest, and they have the right to be upset, and they have the right to scream and curse and not be touched. Unfortunately, when protests are done, officers tend to want to move people out the way and tend to keep on moving. People just do not want to be touched. You see what I mean? So that just, triggers people's like bad behavior, and they just want to just go crazy and and start fighting. I mean, I think that's more important thing going on in the world than dismantling a unit. And again, this is just my opinion, and no one should take my opinions to deter you guys from whatever you guys want to choose to do. I mean, New York City is in a bad situation right now, in a really bad situation. Crime is crazy. I mean, I'm done. I'm not gonna say more. I just don't want to get into it right now. But Ms. Lave, I know you got your hand up, so you can speak.
Yeah, I totally hear you, and I just want to respond to a few points. The SRG has nothing to do with crime. The SRG is actually, we're funneling resources to a unit that their only purpose is to abuse protesters. And like you said, protests have been happening forever. They will continue to happen. They were happening before the SRG. They will be happening after. And the NYPD is perfectly capable of handling protests without the SRG. They did for many years. And I think to your point about, I think someone mentioned earlier that there has always been a relationship between community boards and the precincts. Disbanding the SRG does not mean that those cops don't go anywhere. Exactly right. So if there are concerns about public safety, and you want those cops to go somewhere else, they're not getting fired, right? They're just being moved. They're just not doing this thing. And I think to your point, what we're saying is that the SRG is not keeping us safe. The SRG is doing something that is not necessary, trained to do something like a part of the military that is not necessary. When our communities need resources, our communities need housing and healthcare and supportive services, and programs that will sustain us. So if we're talking about public safety, that's really the core of the campaign. The core of the campaign is that sending in militarized police to neighborhoods, like when you say putting them on every corner, the SRG, 91% of the people that file complaints against them are people of color. So if you're putting them in high crime neighborhoods, what you're doing is you're sending militarized police into Black and brown communities. And we know that stop and frisk is an issue. We know that targeting of Black and brown people is an issue. So when you militarize those people and then put them in communities, it heightens that danger so much. So public safety is absolutely a concern. We all want to feel safe. And there are better ways to spend resources that are not on a unit, that really just brings harm everywhere that they go. So if we do want to create systems and structures, and fund parts of the NYPD that do keep people safe from their perspective, the SRG is not that. Even if you really support the police's mission and their actions, the SRG lives in a totally different world in the way that they act and conduct themselves.
Thanks, Latava. Anyone else has any other comments, concerns?
I'm just going to echo what you said, Mr. Alfredo, in terms of the crime and the violence in the area. I think it's extremely, like, it's getting crazy. At the same time, when anyone is a public servant and they're doing anything when it comes to safety, there needs to be a level of transparency. Like, we have to be able to ask questions. What's happening here? What's going on? And the fact that, you know, they're not okay with sharing their budget could mean, I'm not going to say it means that, could mean that there's, thank you so much, could mean that there's something, you know, shady going on. So you're absolutely right about that. I don't know if a discussion could be had with them about transparency, because I don't think anyone would complain about having, you know, safer neighborhoods. But I do think people, you know, may complain about having their freedoms and liberties infringed upon. So yeah, it's a catch-22, and I think that is something that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. Has anyone, you know, here heard of anyone that has had any type of interaction with them? I'm within the 47th precinct all day, every day. I don't think I've seen any of them yet, thank God. But if anyone has had any experience, please feel free to, like, let us know.
Thank you, Q. I mean, if there's no additional questions, Bang, I'll get to you now.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's just there has to be accountability, kind of like just what my brother Q said, and also to in line. There has to be accountability. Police have a right to work. Yes, there's violence in the city, everything, but also too, if they're told to come and report, speak before the council oversight, there has to be a balance, and it's very important because it's beginning like the answer to no one, and that's where lies the problem. So there has to be accountability, even while discharging their functions, who at the same time. Very important, especially in neighborhoods of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Benga. All right, everyone. If no one else has any more questions or concerns, I think we can close this. We'll bring it to the community board. We're having our community board meeting. I believe this Thursday. We'll bring it up and see what the full board thinks of the situation. They might want to probably hear from that particular unit, which I don't know if that's going to happen. You know, if they don't go down to the hold on, if they don't go down to the council, I doubt they'll come up to us. You know, but I mean, I'm a type of person that I like to hear from both sides, right? So like, you made your presentation, you stated your part, you know what I mean? But right now, everybody's just listen to what you said, right? So everybody's focused on what you said. So it'll be good to also hear, you know, what that particular unit also has to say. I mean,
Yeah, I encourage you to ask. I think every community board I've spoken to has reached out and has not gotten a response, but it would be great if they would talk to you all. So if you get any information that we have not gotten, I would appreciate hearing any of it. I do encourage you all to reach out, try to get, you know, a full rounded perspective of what's been happening.
Definitely. All righty. All right,
Thank
guys.
you so much for having me.
Of course,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Thank you for coming. God bless. Take care, guys. Anyone else? Ursula, you there? Any questions, concerns?
No, I'm here. Can barely hear you. Something's wrong, but I heard most of it.
John Isaac? Anybody else?
No comments.
Okay. All right,
Thank
guys.
you.
7:50. I'll stop the meeting's over at 7:50. Thank you guys for coming out. Enjoy the rest of the day. I'll see you guys Thursday, God willing, and God bless. Have a good night.
Good night.
All right, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Bye bye.
Good night, guys.
Good night.